Good evening, everybody. We're just going to give it about 30 seconds or so just for everybody to join. We've got a lot of people joining us tonight. Almost 300 people have registered for the webinar tonight. Just underline the importance of what AERO South Africa and Safety First Aviator are doing. I think it's really, really important, and the conversations that we have are open, honest, and are there to save lives. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the AERO South Africa webinar in conjunction with Safety First Aviator. The theme for tonight is defining your limitations as a pilot. My name is Neil Piper. I'm the head of content for Messi Frankfurt, South Africa, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Reynolds. She's a portfolio director of Messi Frankfurt, South Africa, and she's also the show director of AERO South Africa. And I know she's been preparing her welcome all afternoon. So on that note, Annelie, over to you.
Thank you, Neil. So this one's better be good. A warm welcome to everyone joining us for the Safety First Aviator and AERO South Africa webinar tonight. As Neil mentioned, I am Annelie Reynolds and I'm the show director for AERO South Africa. Now, in the midst of the third wave of COVID-19 in our country, I am so happy to share some good news with all our avid aviators. Not able to do the AERO event in 2020 and 2021, we have now started planning the event for 2022. AERO South Africa will take place at Wonderboom National Airport from the 7th to the 9th of July next year. We really cannot wait to meet face to face and do business at this business to business general aviation trade show again. As you also might know by now, we've got a virtual marketplace and this site will still be active until the end of August. If you have not yet registered and want to head on over and have a look, visit virtualaerosouthafrica.co.za. That's virtualaerosouthafrica.co.za to register. Registration is free of charge. We will also be uploading tonight's webinar to this platform, so you'll be able to watch it again. Now, we have 4 amazing speakers lined up tonight for this webinar. So I'm going to hand back to Neil to get the show on the road.
Annelie, thank you so much. And I think not just you that wants to get back to face. I think everybody's ready for it. We were just talking about it earlier. And I think the planning that you guys are putting in with the team and the broader industry is really important. And it's positioning us so well for when we are ready to meet face to face.
Definitely.
Thank you, Annelie. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to introduce Fran Smith, of Pilot Insure, who's going to moderate the webinar tonight. And he's going to formally introduce all our speakers. And then just from our side, from Messi Frankfurt, a big thank you to all of you for all of your efforts. Just back to France, he's the founder and MD of Pilot Insure, the specialist and boutique advice firm focusing on investment and risk cover for pilots. If you've been part of these webinars before, you know that France always has a fresh approach to these webinars and keeps it nice and light. And it's really, really good. And he keeps the audiences engaged for the full duration of the webinar. And it's quite a feat to do that. So France, as always, it's great to have you on board again, and it's a pleasure to welcome you. So over to you, France.
Hey, thanks, Neil. Thanks again for what you guys are doing with this. I think it's amazing. I think starting out, I mean, you guys all know what the topic is. I think it's very pertinent. And just before I go into housekeeping and the little bit of details that keeps everyone in check and in line, especially myself, so that I don't go off on a tangent. I think it's worth mentioning just the incredible work and sacrifice that the GA community has done, in the last couple of weeks with all the relief effort that's gone on in KZN. I've been very privileged to be I mean, I couldn't fly down or do anything like that because, you know, it's a bit tough from Cape Town. But there's literally hundreds of guys that came seemingly out of nowhere in the GA community, you know, just spending all kinds of money, their own money, getting people in and out, getting supplies in and out. And I just wanted to mention that going into it, that we really appreciate you guys. I think the difference that aviation made to that is unmeasurable, and you know, it's one of those things where we're never going to be able to put a value on it, but I bet you it would have been a completely different thing without you guys. So you know, thank you very much, and I think it's appreciated countrywide. You know, I think it's a massive feat. Okay, so a bit of housekeeping. We are going to run through these amazing speakers. I think most of them, oh no, every one of these speakers has been on before. We'll do the introductions, questions and answers. We want to keep this, if this is your first time on, we 100% want to keep this dialogue flowing. We want to answer questions. It's supposed to be an informative session. And what we will do is we'll try and stick to format, and you answer your questions at the bottom at the Q&A session, or in the chat. We prefer obviously the Q&A, just easier to track it, and we will at the end give each speaker the chance to respond to those questions. If you want a cup of coffee, you're a bit late. If you want the toilet, you know where it is. Yeah, thanks again for joining us. It's so lucky to be here, to be part of this aviation world, to get this you know, really good content out to you guys. So first up tonight is Lauren Smith. Now, Lauren is from the South African Weather Services. She's been around for quite a long time. She's been part of the Safety First Aviator campaign for 5 years. And she's really our go-to person when it comes to weather forecasting. And as you guys might know, she is extremely open to answering any questions throughout the year, day or night. If you're unsure about flying somewhere, you can definitely get her email address and pop her a mail. She's fantastic about that, and she'll help you out. She's busy with a master's degree on the topic of clear air turbulence, which I think will be amazing to see her research. Yeah, I think what does VFR meteorological limitations actually mean, and how are they determined? That's her topic. So let's start with that and hear what she has to say.
Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Lauren Smith, and I'm a forecaster at the Cape Town Weather Office. I'd like to start by sharing a short video with you all, and I'd like you to question yourself in terms of what could you have done to not be in this scenario, and what can you do if you do find yourself in this type of scenario.
Runway 35, clear for takeoff.
The sky is overcast and the visibility poor. That reported 8-kilometer visibility looks more like 3, and you can't judge the height of the cloud. Your altimeter says you're at 1,500 feet, but your map tells you there's local terrain as high as 1,200 feet. There might even be a tower nearby, because you're not sure just how far off course you are. But you've flown into worse weather than this. So you press on. You find yourself unconsciously easing back just a bit on the controls to clear those none-too-imaginary towers. With no warning, you're in the soup. You peer so hard into the milky white mist that your eyes hurt. You fight the feeling in your stomach. You swallow, only to find your mouth dry. Now you realize you should have waited for better weather. The meeting was important, but not that important. Somewhere a voice is saying, you should have turned back. You now have 178 seconds to live. Your aircraft feels on an even keel, but your compass turns slowly. You push your rudder pedal and add pressure to the controls to stop the turn, but this feels unnatural. So you quickly return the controls to their original position. That feels better. But now your compass is turning a little faster and your airspeed is increasing slightly. You scan your instrument panel for help, but you don't find any. It all looks unfamiliar. You're sure this is just a bad spot. You'll break out in a few minutes. But you don't have a few minutes. You now have 100 seconds to live. You glance at your altimeter and are shocked to see it unwinding. You're already down to 1,200 feet. Instinctively, you pull back on the controls, but the altimeter still unwinds. The engine is into the red, and the airspeed's almost there too. You have 45 seconds to live. Now you're sweating and shaking. There must be something wrong with the controls. Pulling back only moves that airspeed indicator deep into the red. You can hear the wind tearing at the aircraft. You have 10 seconds to live. Suddenly, you see the ground. The trees rush up at you. You can see the horizon if you turn your head far enough, but it's at an unusual angle. You're almost inverted. You open your mouth to scream.
That was quite intense. Not to scare anyone, especially our new student pilots, but it's just to emphasize what you can end up in and the importance of your decision making. A study was done in 2020 on pilots' ability to recognize failure. So in this test, they conducted an unannounced vacuum failure in flight, and they did it on using two aircrafts. The first one was a Piper PA-28-181 Archer and a Beech A-36 Bonanza. The first three groups of the pilots were tested in the Archer with three different types of testing scenarios. A was no training, they just went in and got the failure unannounced. The group B, they received a 30 minutes of a partial panel training prior to their flight. So there you can actually see with that training that this decision-making or recognition time to spot the failure was a lot less than Group A. Group C had a vacuum system failure, and that also almost took them 8 minutes. Then into the Bonanza, Group A, they only experienced an AI failure, and then Group B, AI as well as HSI failures. So there you can see an AI failure, they took a lot longer than the other types of failures. And the point is that even with their testing, they still emphasize that it is important to train yourself in recognizing these type of failures and always to conduct instrument checks. So risk assessment is definitely key. And on top of all of this, it is expected of you to be able to fly within weather that is consistently changing. So why not mitigate risk in a section of your environment where it's a little bit easier to do? So from the weather's perspective, in that environment, there are set rules that are given to you guys to help you mitigate risk. It's VFR and your IFR rules. So today I'd like to touch a little bit more on VFR and then go into. So a quick recap on VMC. So the image displays the rules. If you are flying at and above 10,000 feet above mean sea level, it is required of you to be able to maintain 8 kilometers visibility, then as well as 2 kilometers horizontally spacing between your clouds or away from your cloud, and then 10,000 feet below your ceiling or your cloud base. Then if you're flying a little lower at say 3,000 feet altitude, then you still need to remain a 5 kilometer visibility minimum. When you go into a control zone, so that's your aerodromes or any other type of control zone, you still need to remain a 2 kilometer horizontal distance or clearance from your clouds, and as well as then only 500 feet from your ceiling. Visibility as well then must still remain at 5 kilometers. This is then where your special VFR comes in your control zone. And it's authorized by your traffic controllers. So you will then request for special VFR. So what does that mean? So special VFR is conducted within weather conditions that are below your VFR requirements. So that means when you have a visibility that's less than 5,000 meters and your ceiling is less than 1,005. The aircraft needs to be equipped by a two-way radio in order to have communications with ATC. And then also you can request a special VFR when you are leaving a controlled zone that is under IMC conditions. So what are the things that then ATC will then provide you? They will provide you with a standard separation from your other IFR flights. Also, your IFR will not be delayed to accommodate special VFR. ATC shall specify the conditions under which you can fly. Hence, you have to ask for their clearance. An aircraft operating under special VFR within your control zone when VMC no longer exists may not be given a specific level to fly at, but you can be instructed to remain clear from any cloud and continue your clear sight of the ground. VFR, or special VFR rather, is not a given, and it is not applied outside your control zone. I really honestly hope that this gives you guys a little bit more clarity of when to use special VFR and when it is allowed and when not. So where can you find your weather information? We have an aviation website from the South African Weather Service where all our products go to. It is for you, so please register. It's for free. Just need your pilot registration and number, or license number rather, because it is for you and we don't want just anyone using it. Also, there's an email address that you guys can contact us with any complaints or recommendations or improvements. So please feel free. So under your observational tab, you can get your METARs, and also remember, if you hover over your code, it actually decodes it for you. You also can go onto your radar tab and satellite as well as webcams, which is quite handy, especially on those early mornings around by the Kruger, where that low cloud tends to linger fair too long there at the northeastern parts of the country. Also, you can access your QNH analysis or your synoptic chart, which is very handy. It is available to you every 4 hours, and you'll be able to see where's your high pressures, your low pressures, and then associated QNH as well. Under domestic, you find your SIG charts that you can use. A tip would be to click on most recent and always remember to look at the date of your chart and time. Wind charts are also found under this tab, and you can find your block format as well as your bar format. And with your block format, you can also have your different levels indicating temperature as well. Then under flight, briefing and international, you can find your advisories, you can file a flight plan, and that would be in terms of just MET. So you will file or schedule a flight report, and that will then give you either your TAPs, your metas, your route chart, which means your significant chart, and so forth. Also, a very nice tab that I really like as well is the graphic SIGMET and AMET under your international tab, where you can actually graphically see the warnings. You can zoom in, zoom out, you can click on the little pins, and that actually gives you then exactly the coordinates of the polygon and the type of warning. And also you can get your international SIG charts under your international tab as well. Back to the forecasting tab under takeoff data, that is where you can find it. It will bring you to this type of a window called your takeoff parameters, and you can then click on any of those square buttons there, choosing your aerodrome. And then it gives you your time, your temperature, your QNH, and your wind direction, as well as your speed for a forecasted amount of hours. Every aerodrome chain is different, rather, in terms of how many hours per forecast it gets sent. It is kept under monitoring, so it does get sometimes sent. As you can see, the OR Tambu was sent 12 minutes past 6, so that means it had been updated or amended. This information is quite handy. You can do a lot of calculations with it. For example, you can even use this information to calculate your density altitude. And that's all from me. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Excellent. So something I failed to mention before that, that was obviously pre-recorded. But if you guys have any questions, I'm sure some of the other panelists might be able to answer it. If not, we'll definitely get back to you, on the answers. So please don't think that you can't ask any questions, directed at Lauren. We'll definitely deal with it. I think it's great information. I think this is everything, you did some stage of your training, you'd learn about it. But for most, it's been such a long time that we forget some of the basic stuff. So I thought what a great refresher. The next panelist speaker we have is Caroline Cole, and she's the founder of Essential Pilot, and she's going to be talking about the practical applications of your personal limitations, and that's obviously based on your own skill levels. Which I think is probably the most important thing, is to know your limitations, to really understand your skill set, and to stay within that. A bit of background, Caroline is a qualified commercial pilot and flight instructor, ground instructor, author, aviation blogger, and just a general aviation snoop. She holds a BA honors in political science and international relations, and came to aviation a bit later in life, following a very successful career as a professional athlete in the sport of triathlon, which held multiple national titles and presented South Africa at the elitist levels. Now, this passion, obviously a lot of discipline, has translated into a love for general aviation and the development of female participation in the aviation sector. I think we all know we need much more of that. And she's a firm believer that proper planning and self-discipline will lead to a safer flying experience. A bit of a warbird fanatic and dreams of flying inverted in her own machine. Caroline, I hope that did you a bit of justice, and I think your presentation could speak volumes. Really looking forward to hearing it. Welcome.
Hello, thank you, everyone. Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at defining your personal limitations as a pilot. So as we know, every trained pilot out there is aware of the legal minimums required to carry out a flight. True, you might have forgotten some of these, but you know where to find them, or you should know anyway. Examples of legal minimums. So a valid license and medical, we'll know that. The requirement to have certain aircraft documents on board. Weather minimums for VFR, as Lauren has so graciously just reminded us of. Airspace restrictions. Radio communications, just as some examples of legal minimums. The problem is very few actually consider personal minimums. So in commercial operations, they have standard operating procedures, or SOPs, which provide clear minimum procedures for their flight deck crews over and above the legal minimums. So it doesn't mean that we have legal minimums, that is what we have to fly at. We can add safety buffers to those. So pilots in general aviation actually need to develop their own individual SOPs based on your personal minimums. So what are personal minimums? So your personal minimums are basically your individual set of operating criteria, procedures, rules, or guidelines that will help you as an individual to make decisions when you are flying. So personal flight decisions, it's going to help you to do that. So now you're thinking, what does this actually mean, and how on earth do I define my own personal minimums? Because they are personal, how on earth do we decide what these are? So some of you may have heard of the acronym PAVE. So PAVE represents the pilot, the aircraft, the environment, and external pressures. And we can use this to actually determine our own personal minimums. So looking at the pilot, pilot is whether you're going to decide if you are fit to fly on a particular day. So in order to do this, we look at the I'm Safe acronym. So just like we have VFR minimum, the I'm Safe, everybody sort of remembers this, but they don't always remember what it is. So first of all, illness. Do you have some sort of, are you not feeling too well? I don't know, have you got a blocked ear? I don't know, do you feel a bit of a cold coming on? Things like that. Medication, that's an important one, because often we will go and take over-the-counter medication, sometimes without eating, and we don't know that the effects that this medication can actually have when we are flying, particularly in unpressurized aircraft. So that's an important one. We need to be aware of the medication we are taking. And what effect it will have on us. Stress. So stress, Ari is going to go into some detail on that for us. But there's different types of stress. You have acute stress, which is sort of normal in flying. And then you have chronic stress. Chronic stress is generally a situation where you can't sleep at night because you're worried. And that's signs that the stress is getting to chronic levels. Alcohol, interestingly, I was curious to see how many accidents were actually alcohol related when it comes to flying. And surprisingly, some of the, well, in accidents, they've detected ethanol levels in fatal accidents of sometimes up to 10% of accidents. So alcohol, as we know, it's 8 hours bottle to throttle, but alcohol really comes into play when somebody is regularly using alcohol. And I think the biggest concern is those that tend to be abusing alcohol. And I think you have to be really honest with yourself. Can you go without the alcohol? Were it up to me, 24 hours, no alcohol. It just seems like something in your control that you can do. Fatigue. So this is an important one, especially with the guys that are working all day and really want to go flying, but you'll find sometimes the fatigue levels reach a portion where it really can affect the safety of a flight. You suddenly find yourself starting to forget to do things, like in your checks. You need to be able to recognize when fatigue is getting to you. Okay, and the last one is emotion. And this is particularly important in these times. We are going through difficult times at the moment, and a lot of people use flying as an escape, which is fine. But you need to be aware of where the line is. If you have had a traumatic experience, it's not the right time to go and fly. You need to get your emotions under control before you go and fly. Okay, so that's the I'm Safe acronym for the pilot. So to give you a scenario of illness, so for example, if you've got a cold on the ground, it doesn't seem so bad. You think, oh, I've got a bit of a sniffle. It's not the end of the world. I've got a bit of a drippy nose. It will not only be uncomfortable when you are flying, but it can also be distracting and potentially dangerous. So especially when you're flying in an unpressurized aircraft, as you climb in altitude, the pressure differential between the ambient air and the air in your nasal cavities can vary greatly. So you might end up with tremendous pain, something that you didn't experience on the ground, and this can impact your ability to operate a safe flight. So be aware of just that little sniffle. It can make things very difficult for you in flight. So ask yourself as the pilot, have you completed the I'm Safe checklist? Are you feeling sick in any way? Are you on any medication that could interfere with the flight? Are you under any stress or experiencing anxiety? And have you consumed alcohol in the past 8 hours, or are you hungover? Are you well rested? Very difficult sometimes. You've got friends and family that want to go fly the next day, but you ended up having to work longer hours on a particular day, but now you've committed to doing the flight, but you are tired because you worked late. You have to be honest with yourself. Are you too tired to fly? Okay, then moving on to the aircraft. So with the aircraft, we want to decide if the aircraft itself is fit to fly. So we've assessed ourselves as the pilot. Now we need to look at the aircraft. So the first thing you want to assess are the aircraft limitations. Very important. A lot of people tend to overlook this a bit. We can fit 6 people in here, so it'll be fine. Or there's 4 seats, it'll be fine. But you need to look at the aircraft limitations, especially the guys that are doing hire and fly. You cannot exceed those limitations. Not only is it dangerous, insurances will not pay out if you have an accident and you've exceeded those limitations. So be careful of that one. A suitable aircraft, that's a very important one too, because there's no ways you're going to be flying over a high terrain of 8,000 feet in a Cessna 152. So you really need to consider, do you have the correct aircraft for the operation that you intend doing? It doesn't mean because the aircraft is available that is the right aircraft for your purpose. Naturally, is the aircraft airworthy? Okay. So there you also want to make sure that all the documents are in order, especially the hire and flyers. Once again, make sure that all the documents are in order and that the dates have not expired. A lot of people tend to overlook the documents. Oh, yes, we know the documents. We open the bag, we check, oh, there's papers in there. It must be the right thing, and shove it back in. Please check that the documents are in order. Fuel. So fuel, we want to check, does the aircraft have fuel? Is it the correct fuel? And also the fuel quantity. How much fuel are we going to need in this aircraft? Equipment. So aircraft usually have some sort of a minimum equipment that is supposed to be in the aircraft. You need to check that that aircraft is properly equipped according to the manuals. It needs to be correctly equipped and everything in order and working. Emergencies. I think this is a very important one because a lot of people overlook this. Emergency procedures vary in different aircraft. So yes, you might know, okay, a speed field fault flap, but you need to know the exact ways of addressing emergencies in specific aircraft. So especially if you're flying a number of different aircraft, please be aware of how to handle emergencies. I recommend also before or while you're waiting for your oil to heat up, for example, each time you fly, consider going over one emergency. So maybe if it's an electrical fire, for example, use your hands, go through the procedures and touch the relevant controls. It's really good airmanship to practice that. Go through at least one emergency every time you fly. That way, it'll keep you current on your emergency procedures as well. Okay, then also your flight experience on the type. This is going to be quite a limiting factor of what you can do with that aircraft, depending on how much experience you have on that type. So very hard to go and do some mountain flying when you've literally done a 2-hour conversion on an aircraft. You don't know that aircraft well enough to handle it in difficult conditions. So you need to be honest with yourself in terms of how much experience you have on that aircraft and where you're going to be flying that aircraft as well. Okay, so acronym for that, a safe flight. So I want to give you just a little scenario on aircraft. This is something that actually happened to me personally. Where I was faced with the situation of, is this serious or is this not serious? Sometimes you get these things in your pre-flight, you're looking at things and you're thinking, I don't really know. Is this serious or is this not serious? So in this case, I actually spotted these fine cracks. You might struggle to see them, but there's 2 fine cracks here that were on the rear stabilizer fairing. At first I considered, are these just paint cracks or what is it? And actually when I ran my hands over it, I could feel that it was not a paint crack, it was a real crack. So now I'm considering, well, is this potentially dangerous? Can I fly like this? I wasn't really sure because at the time, all I could see was these 2 faint cracks on the top. Luckily, I put my detective hat on and I started looking a bit deeper. Okay, so here you can probably see the cracks a little bit better. So this was what was on the top. So I started to look at this fairing a little bit deeper and I looked underneath. And if I hadn't have put my head down and looked underneath, I wouldn't have seen this. So the whole fairing was actually fiberglass. And because of the cold, it became brittle and it was old and it had started to crack. This aircraft had been flown by a number of people like this and nobody had seen this. So often what you're seeing on the top, if you see something small, really dig a little bit deeper and make sure. So ultimately, when I was actually showing somebody this problem, the whole piece fell out with a finger touch. So I can only imagine what would have happened if this piece had actually fallen off in flight. One doesn't know. So if this piece had broken off in flight, would it have fallen to the ground? How would it affect the aerodynamics? I'm not sure. So really, needless to say, I didn't fly this aircraft. But really look thoroughly. If something feels a bit suspicious, look a little bit deeper. Okay, so always check your aircraft like a detective. Even if it's your own aircraft and you fly it regularly, you don't know what could have happened. Like I said, this is probably brought on by the extreme temperatures that we had, old sort of fiberglass that got perished and it started to crack. So be a detective when you're looking at your aeroplane. In my case, especially, I find that I have a network of people that I can trust and I can call. So if, for example, I had just stopped at the 2 cracks on the top, I would have phoned somebody who I know knows aircraft or who's in maintenance, send them a photo and ask them for their opinion, because I maybe couldn't have made that decision immediately just with those 2 cracks. If it doesn't feel right, it isn't right. So always trust that little feeling of doubt. Don't let anybody ever push you into say and let them say to you, oh, it's okay, you can fly it like this. No, it'll be fine, don't worry. If you have that feeling that it isn't right, believe me, it isn't right, and you're making the right decision. Be stubborn about it and don't let anyone push you into flying that. And as I said previously, a small sign can be an indicator of a bigger problem. So don't just brush off those small things, oh, it's nothing. Look deeper. Okay, so that's the aircraft. The third thing is the environment. You want to decide if the environment is suitable on the day for your flight, your training, and your skill level. Environmental factors, everybody has different capabilities in handling these things. So you have to really assess yourself personally when it comes to the environment. So the first thing you can do, check the NOTAMs, and I know people never check the NOTAMs. So you could be going somewhere, little did you know, they erected a giant crane on the end of the runway and you didn't know about it. Okay, then you really look quite stupid arriving there and you didn't know about it. So it's more embarrassing not to know or not to check the NOTAMs, than to arrive there and see a crane and kind of explain why you didn't know. Please just check the NOTAMs. It's honestly, if you're going from one place to another, you just need to check the NOTAMs for your destination and your alternates at worst. It's not a big effort. Obstacles. So yes, sometimes we plan a route from A to B, but we don't actually analyze the obstacles. Oh, for example, we're going from Joburg to Durban. There's something called the Drakensberg in between. Consider those sort of obstacles. Do I have the skill level? Do I understand weather and wind conditions around mountains? Do I have mountain flying experience? Can my aircraft fly over that obstacle? You need to check those things as well. Do you have the skill and knowledge of what to do when you encounter those kind of obstacles? Weather, I mean, that's just a given. Be extremely thorough about your weather. It's not just point A and point B. Always check in between. What is going on in between? Do I understand the weather good enough to know whether I might encounter mist at Harrismith on my way to Durban? Please check the weather carefully for your entire route, not just point A and point B. And once again, assess, do you have the skills and the license privileges to be able to fly in that kind of weather? If you're not IF rated, why are you going to even consider flying in IF conditions? GPS, that one is interesting because sometimes we get a new GPS or we're flying an aircraft with glass cockpit that we haven't got much experience on. You need to assess, do you have the skills to operate that GPS correctly? Do you understand all the functions? Because if you're now fiddling with this thing in flight, it can very much be a big distraction. So GPS, you need to assess your skills on GPSs and glass cockpits before going off on a flight with those. Runway length. Runway length, very important, something that people don't consider. They say, okay, well, I'm taking off today. I've got a small aircraft. It should be fine. And then they arrive at the airfield and they realize, oh, this runway is like 800 meters shorter than the one I'm used to. So you need to assess, do you have the skills to land on a shorter runway? Have you practiced short runway landings recently? And also the type of surface, because if you're landing on a soggy grass runway and you've never landed on grass runway before, you need to be aware of that. So check the length and the surface of your runway. Alternates, very important as well, because if, for example, the weather in Harrismith suddenly is pretty bad, you need to have planned alternates. You've got to know, where am I going? Once again, do you have the skills to divert? Do you know how to divert to those airfields? And assess the airfield condition at your alternate. Does it match what I can do? Does it match what my aircraft needs as well? Fuel requirements. You can never have too much fuel as far as possible. I am not a person who likes to run it down right down to the reserve, obviously within the weight and balance limits, but check, assess for yourself, what are your minimum fuel requirements? How do you feel? Do you feel comfortable just with enough and a reserve, or do you feel more comfortable with slightly more? I know with slightly more, I feel more comfortable, and it stresses me a lot less if I know I've got a little buffer in the tanks in case of any headwinds or any alternates that weren't planned. I like to have that extra buffer. It relieves my stress. Another one, flight plan. Do you know how to file a flight plan? If not, please, we will even do a webinar on that. A flight plan, especially if your skill levels are not exactly of military level, I really recommend that you file a flight plan. That way, somebody is monitoring you, monitoring your progress. It takes a lot of the workload off when it comes to the radio work and all of that. Flight plan is not, in my opinion, not optional. It's an absolute must. Even if you're just going for a short flight, it's really nice to know that someone out there is keeping an eye on you. They know where you are. Okay, and then takeoff and landing distances as well. You need to assess that. Can you take off in on short fields, landing distances for the weight of my aircraft in certain density altitude conditions? Do I have enough distance to land the aircraft? And am I capable of landing in that distance? So between your aircraft and your skill level, what is the minimum takeoff and landing distances that you feel comfortable? That would be setting your minimums for that. Okay, so that's now graphed. Okay, so environment scenario, special VFR. As Lauren explained, we need a ceiling of at least 600 feet and a visibility of at least 1,500 meters. So VFR, on the other hand, from the region of 1,500 to flight level 100 outside of control zones requires a visibility of 5 kilometers or more, distance from cloud 2,000 meters horizontally and 500 feet vertically, and no more than 3/8 of cloud within a 5-kilometer radius. So if you look at these, you can see a distinct difference in the safety margin between special VFR and normal VFR. You also need visual reference to the ground. So if you comfortably fly in VFR conditions, you really have to look at, consider the special VFR conditions and decide if you are capable of flying in these conditions when you are actually more accustomed to flying in VFR, which is a lot more buffered. So for example, that's a picture showing you what special VFR would look like. So you need to assess, would you choose to take off if cleared for special VFR? So even if you cleared for it, would you actually take off in this? This is what it looks like. Would you feel comfortable in this? It might be legal, but is it really that beneficial? Do you absolutely need to take off in special VFR conditions? Does it make sense? Is it absolutely that urgent that you need to go in this kind of weather condition? Also, do you have regular experience flying in these conditions? Because yes, normally you fly in normal VFR conditions, but flying in special VFR conditions, not many of us have experience in flying that. And lastly, are you IFR rated should conditions deteriorate? Which, looking at this picture, is quite possible that conditions are going to get worse. So you need to assess your skills before getting yourself engaged in these conditions. Okay, and then the last one is your external factors. So we need to learn to recognize and act on external factors that affect us and that actually pose a risk. For example, getting to a meeting. The urgency of it. We need to actually commit ourselves that if we are running late and we have to get to a meeting, we will rather not fly, because the pressure we put ourselves under when we have to get somewhere is going to make us commit to going to our destination. If the weather deteriorates en route, we're going to push on. So you need to carefully consider, if you are under pressure to get somewhere, is it perhaps not better to take alternative transport? Objective completion. So when at the last webinar, when we kind of looked at approaches, this is one. So our objective is to land the aircraft. We become obsessed with this objective that we will get to the destination and we will land that aircraft. Here's an external factor we have to be aware of. We must not be focused on the end objective. Okay, we need to be focused on flying safely first, rather than reaching the end objective, which is landing the aircraft. We can make other decisions. Someone is waiting for us on the other side. That's another one. So not only do we have to get somewhere, but we've got someone else waiting. You need to have a plan in mind for all of these things. So if someone is waiting and you're delayed for whatever reason, or you see the weather is deteriorating, you need to make an agreement with the person that there is a possibility that I might be delayed or I might need to turn back. Factor these things before you take off. Then you already making that decision even before you've taken off. Impressing a friend, that's a tough one, because now you take friends for a flight and you really want to impress them with your skills. Of course, nobody ever wants to do a bad landing in front of their friends. You want to show them that you're a good pilot based on your piloting skills. Very few people consider impressing friends with their safety skills. And I would rather go for that. And you'd be surprised at how non-flying people actually appreciate your emphasis on safety and doing things safely. So rather try and impress them with your safety skills rather than your flying skills. And the last one is always have a plan B. Before you even get in the aircraft, have a plan in mind if things do not work out. There's a problem with my aircraft, or suddenly I find I'm feeling a bit ill, or we've now been delayed because somebody was late. What am I going to do? This plan B needs to be decided before you even get to the airfield. What are you going to do if this doesn't work out? That could be, for example, taking a commercial flight, or driving somewhere, or postponing your pleasure flights, scenic flight for another day. Okay, so that one, instead of going, we can go and sip. So if things don't work out and you recognize these external pressures as being too risky, rather go and sip a coffee and try again another day. Okay, so just a quick scenario on fulfilling expectations. So you've taken friends on a wonderful scenic flight. Coming back to the airport to land, you begin the approach, but suddenly you find the landing light switch seems to be stuck. So what normally happens is you get a bit obsessed trying to fix this landing light switch that is now sticky. You managed to rectify the problem at 500 feet above ground level. But during this time, your approach speed, because you were distracted by that landing light switch, is 8 knots higher than it should be. And you're not yet on your desired flap setting. So you've got two things wrong here. At your stable point, your speed is too high and your flap setting is not correct for your landing. So what do? Continue with the landing while trying to slow the aircraft down, or go around for another approach with your friends watching in terror when they don't land as they're expected to land. So either way, these things, both of these situations are not good. So continuing the landing while unstable can result in a hard landing, a runway excursion, or even a costly accident. So that's not a good option to start with. Then the second option, executing a go-around could actually cause uninformed passengers to panic, and that will add to your stress as well. So effectively, these scenarios can be mitigated by committing to your personal minimums checklist. If your personal minimums checklist says, if I'm unstable, I will go around, then you can brief your passengers on your procedures, on your personal minimums checklist beforehand. So if you tell your passengers, okay, if we're unstable on the approach, if we've got something slightly wrong, my normal procedure is to go around, so don't be alarmed if I do that. Then immediately your passengers are at ease when you execute a go around. Okay, so setting your personal minimums. Your personal minimums will form a safety buffer between the demands of a situation and the extent of your skills. So I've prepared a little personal minimums checklist, which I will post on my website as well, for you to go through. This I find is a very effective thing. A lot of things on here people have actually forgotten or don't always consider. You use your aircraft checklist, but you don't go through your own personal minimums checklist. What the intention of this checklist is to actually assess your hazard levels and your risk levels as well. So if you realize, okay, I've been under stress, and the landing distance at my destination airport is maybe a little bit shorter than what I'm used to, you need to assess how many of these factors can build up into a risk. So this I will put on my website if anybody wants to download it. So finally, the go or no-go decision. To go is usually fairly easy. It's easy if the pilot is fit for flying, the weather's good, your aircraft is airworthy, and the mission or your flight, your intended flight, is well within your comfort zone or your skill level. That's an easy decision. The no-go is slightly more difficult. There you need to understand the risks in order because those are critical to the safe completion of every flight. So risks need to be recognized and understood. You have to consider all these risks very carefully and continuously during the flight as well. Personal minimums will help you to recognize these risks applicable to your particular flight. So finally, the purpose of your personal minimums. It'll help you to perceive the possible hazards to your flight. Sometimes you need it on paper to see, okay, there are hazards here. Then you need to process the level of risk associated with those hazards. And then finally, you will perform the safest action based on that assessment of the levels of risk. Okay, and that's me for today. If you've got any questions or comments, you can email me, you can call me. As I said, I will post that checklist on my website as well for you to download as well.
Thanks, Caroline. So I think that was, you can hear by the talking that definitely comes from a very deep, thought-provoking instructor's point of view. I think it's very well explained, and I think he did an amazing job. I mean, some of those stats I had no idea about, you know, the 10% on the alcohol, and I just want to quickly mention, you know, you're talking about the insurance thing. I think in aviation, everyone always just seems to think about their aircraft insurance. You know, I think that's really the go-to thing. But just a heads up, just so that, you know, that happens to be what I'm into. Don't forget about your life insurance. Most of those things are applicable to that as well. And, you know, most guys we speak to aren't even covered for their flying. So just as a side note, just to make sure that's also properly done. But great stuff. Thank you, Caroline. And I think it's going to be really good for a lot of people when this video comes out, just because there's so much information, is to go over it again and you know, do a refresher on some of the things. Amazingly well done. Thank you.
Sure.
So guys, next person needs very little introduction. Sankey White. The topic is I'm outside my own limits and in trouble. What I do. Now, Sankey doesn't really need too much of an introduction. I think she's been in the certain rescue industry for 27 years, aviation for like 300 years. It's weird, right? Because she's 29, but she's really the guardian angel. You know, she's the person you want to know when things go bad. You want to know Sankey's got your back. And trust me when I say this, she's like Mama Aviation. Probably the easiest person to speak to when you are in trouble and stressed out. Sankey, you know, again, thank you so much. I know you've also been through a hell of a ride through this COVID thing, and you know, changing positions and all the kind of things. So really thank you for still being with us, doing this with us, and just being a part of making aviation safer.
Thanks so much, Frans, and good evening to everybody. Yeah, I thought I was going to walk away from this and go on an early retirement, and that did not work. So I'm glad to still be with you, and I hope we can do this for many years to come.
We need you too much. You can't go away. I told you that years ago.
Guys, fortunately, ICAO has decided that they can't lose me. So I'm very, very active on the ICAO Search and Rescue Technical Expert Work Group. And that's important because that makes the world we fly in better. And I had to change my motto a little bit, but here it goes. Because we join hands, others lead. So I know that we don't have a lot of time, but I was actually doing a bit of work for ICAO, and I got hold of a very sad accident that we had a few years ago from an aerobatics team, and I decided that I want to talk about always have an out. It also scares me that we are going into the summer season, and that's the times when things go wrong. So people, please forgive me, I've changed the topic a little bit, but I think we need to talk about always plan and always have an out. Our biggest danger is our attitude. And I think Chuck Yeager said it so well. There's no such thing as a natural born pilot. Whatever my aptitudes or talents, becoming a proficient pilot was hard work, really a lifetime's learning experience. So sometimes we need to look at those attitudes. And I know, you know, the better we get and the more the flying and the better we get at flying, we sometimes forget that we are still vulnerable. Aviate, navigate, communicate. And I mean, that is something that you hear so many times. I just want to say one thing. Common approach to all flying situations, especially in emergency conditions. And Caroline said it so well. You know, I think we must train all the time to stay within our emergency conditions. Aviation studies have found that pilots get so focused on solving a problem in an emergency that they sometimes forget to fly the aeroplane. Teaches pilots to fly the aeroplane first, then navigate, and once the situation is under control, communicate. People, please remember there's ATCs out there that will listen to you. Don't forget to tell them that you are in trouble. Act first, get your bearings, and then call home. Always leave yourself an out. It's probably the most important rule for pilots, leaving yourself an out. It means that never getting into a situation you can't get out with nowhere to go. Please do this by planning for alternate routes, taking extra fuel, and always looking for an emergency landing spot, even when there isn't an emergency. Whenever you make a decision, make sure you leave yourself another option in case things don't go as planned. Nothing flies without fuel. Caroline said it so well as well. An aeroplane obviously won't fly without fuel, and humans can't fly without energy. Whenever you get your energy from endless cups of coffee or a healthy diet, it's important to feed the system so it keeps running. Takeoff is optional. Landing is mandatory. True in the most literal sense for pilots, this rule applies to everyone. Don't take off unless you're sure you can land. This can also be interpreted as don't start a project unless you're sure you can follow through, or always finish what you've started. Stay out of clouds. Guys, really, nobody likes to get rained on. Pilots are taught everything they need to know about weather, thunderstorms, and clouds, and they know it's best to stay out of the clouds. Clouds can mean turbulence, embedded rain, or thunderstorms and lack of visibility, and we are so moving into that season now. Flying into a cloud on a visual flight is risky. You can no longer see other aeroplanes, towers, or mountains, for example. Stay out of the clouds in the real world too. Avoid trouble and steer clear environments in which you can't see clearly enough to make it through to the other side without crashing. Inadvertent flight into IMC, people, we've seen it so many times, and I thought it won't hurt so much, but even now with me being out of the very first response, every accident breaks my heart. Please, into IMC is one of the deadliest mistakes you can make in general aviation, and according to reports, vehicle flights into IMC accounts for over 25% of all fatalities in GA flying. If the weather starts deteriorating on your flight, start looking for diversion airports and don't delay your decision to divert. If weather conditions start falling apart quickly, consider a 180-degree turn and fly back to where the weather is better. It can take up to 60 seconds for experienced IFR pilots to orientate themselves in the clouds. If you're a VFR pilot or you're an instrument-rated pilot that isn't proficient, you may be getting yourself into something you can't handle, not to mention it's not legal. CFIT situation, pilot-induced situation. The pilot encounters weather conditions that are worse than forecast, attempts to maintain or regain visual contact with the ground in an area of very low cloud, descent below minimum safe altitude. What is your minimum safe altitude? What is so important that you have to get somewhere when you know that it's unsafe? If you look at this wreck here, now I don't like doing the wreck pictures anymore, but this person had 4 times where he actually could have saved himself, and he decided to push on, and this was the results of that push on. Never let an aeroplane take you somewhere that your brain didn't get to 5 minutes earlier. And I mean, instrument pilots in particular are taught to stay ahead of the aeroplane to avoid trouble. Staying ahead of the aeroplane means knowing exactly where you are and where you're going at all times. Always planning the next step, preparing for the aeroplane's arrival before it arrives. This keeps pilots aware of their position in the clouds and prevents them from losing track of the aeroplane's position as it flies along without any visual reference to the ground. Preparing for the future and knowing exactly what you plan to do before you do it will serve you well in other aspects of life. Always have an out. Do not take on the many versions of cumulus granitis available in this beautiful country. If you cannot see them, they still exist. A very well-known airline pilot flying in a loose formation with his friend en route an aerobatics event, surviving and VFR'd into IMC situation, where he lost his friend, and fellow aviators said it so well in retrospect. We did not have an out. Always have an out. Fly safe, stay safe, and if you need a guardian angel, phone me. I will fly with you. Thanks very much. Enjoy your evening. Take care.
Thanks, Heike. I think it's always a great presentation. You know, I feel like very often, James, you must feel like you're saying the same things over and over again. But you know, I think statistics don't lie, and it's almost like a bit of a stuck record, isn't it? It's really the same mistakes that are being made, which is why, you know, I think we always come with the same message: try to hammer it in, hammer it in, hammer it in. You know, thank you. I think it's the same thing as, you know, all this relief efforts in KZN where it's unmeasurable. I think your life's dedication to aviation is unmeasurable. I mean, I'm sure you've literally saved hundreds of lives. So anyway, that just makes me very proud to be, you know, associated with you and all the other speakers. Yeah, just thank you for being with us. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, guys, moving right along. Our next speaker is the brilliant Ari Levine. He's part of Mayday SA. His topic, unless he also changed it, just joking, Sankey, is the effect of stress on pilots' capabilities. So you guys can see this all kind of leads in together into the main topic, which is brilliant. Now, Ari has been a GA pilot for probably 32 years now. He's an IT professional with a passion for information security, a long-term student of aviation safety, and has been a member of Mayday SA since 2018. I said this before, Mayday SA is an absolutely fantastic organization. They're really the guys that help you out. Ari, if I can maybe say, from an emotional and mental state, where, you know, when things go wrong, as with all of us, especially now through this last, you know, year and a half, two and a half years in aviation, where I mean, what's really gone right, you know, they are the guys that are there to, you know, talk with you about it, talk through the issues with you, share experiences, and just to make this clear, I mean, Mayday SA is open to everyone. Mayday SA is not like a pilot specific special club of people. Mayday SA is really there to help pilots, their families, the entire aviation industry, you know, everyone else as well, to get through some of the major stresses. It just happens to be that they all involved in aviation, which might make it easier just to relate, you know, from an aviation point of view. Ari, thanks again for being with us. Look forward to your presentation. Let's smash it.
Thanks, Franz. I hope everybody can see the nice little red dot of the pointer. Franz has given a very nice introduction to Mayday, but I think just to reiterate, Mayday is there to listen. If you've got a problem and you need somebody to talk to, please contact us. There are contact details and somebody will get back to you. Let's talk about stress. So the formal definition of stress is a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. I think my favorite is the slightly more informal one below. I'm sure everybody's seen that in slightly less family-friendly terms. But what Caroline touched on is there is a difference between acute stress and chronic stress. Acute stress is something that happens over a short time, and chronic stress is something that happens over a longer time, and the effects tend to linger. And both of these have something that we need to talk about from an aviation perspective. Human function varies according to stress. And of course, as is typical with this, I've just spotted the spelling mistake in the diagram that I thought was such a good one. It should be healthy tension, not healthy tension. We rely as humans on stress to optimize our performance. If you don't have enough stress, you'll see that you operate in what's called the drone zone. Basically, you're bored out of your skull and you don't perform nearly according to what you can. As the stress increases, we go through a zone of optimum stress where we've got healthy tension and we're interested and engaged, and the psychologists use the term aroused. To them, it means something different than it means to the rest of us. So apologies to the psychologists. But what starts getting important for what we're talking about this evening is what happens when we've got acute stress that's more than we can tolerate, or we've got chronic stress that basically pushes us past our peak. Essentially, you'll see there are two very nice words, anabolic and catabolic. Anabolic means building up and catabolic means destroying, basically. And once we've passed maximum stress, performance actually decreases, and it decreases quite rapidly. Everybody's familiar with burnout, potentially breakdown. And this is also where we land up with panic, where people just, ek kan nie meer nie, corporaal. That's exhaustion. And this is very, very important from an aviation point of view, because typically when we think about how we're going to perform, whether it's a normal task or an emergency or an abnormal procedure, we're generally counting on operating in this area, because after all of us are above average pilots. So it's a problem when we're operating beyond where we think we are, because we can't actually do what we think we can. Stress has got benefits. As we saw from the graph, it improves performance up to a point. It allows us to be interested and engaged, and that's how we learn things and how we stay interested. But there are also some real downsides. Exhaustion and burnout, we don't really need to go into in too much detail. It's not good. The performance gap is what we tend to find causes the most issues in aviation. And there are also long-term health consequences. Chronic stress can result in very serious mental and physical problems: depression, heart issues, musculoskeletal issues, immune system problems, and there are even some forms of cancer that can be caused or exacerbated and made worse by chronic stress. Everybody's heard the stories of the high stress individuals who die young. It's real. It's not just a story. How do we recognize it? It can be a real problem. Acute stress and chronic stress can have many of the same symptoms and may well lead to depression. So Robert Sapolsky says that really major depression he's talking about, but stress is the same. If you can't enjoy things, then you know that you are operating beyond where you should from a stress and a depression point of view. As an aviator, stress has some really nasty effects. It biases our risk assessment. We've had Sainki and Caroline talking about risk assessments, but specifically what happens under stress is that you tend to, when you're under stress, exaggerate the benefits of what you're trying to do, and you tend to disregard the negative consequences or the negative potentials. And there's a real gender difference here. Ladies, you tend to be better off than the men. Stressed males tend to be more willing to take risks, whereas females under stress become more conservative about taking risks. Stress increases startle, and that's the reaction that you have when you reach 150 feet and your engine stops dead. That is what we call startle. Startle leads to surprise, and stress reduces the ability to cope with that as well. The scientific version of this says that stress causes a temporary reduction in our ability to think clearly. Essentially, the short version is stress makes you stupid. And the psychologists have done studies which show that you can have a 15 to 30% reduction in IQ purely from acute or chronic stress. And you'll end up with tunnel vision. Sainki talked about the Everglades crash where everybody was focused on the light and not flying the aeroplane. Very relevant here. Stress tends to eliminate our ability to divide our attention, and that's a vital aviation skill. And it's a real problem in much the same way as hypoxia. The organ that is most affected by stress is least likely to alert us to the fact that we are stressed. Recognizing this can be a real problem. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, that's a very good sign that you are under more stress than you should be. Something to think about for your I'm safe checklist. And how can we fight this from an aviation? Well, from a general point of view, those who've tuned into some of the earlier webinars will know that the standard answer is exercise. Yes, I am being paid by my AME to say that, but it is actually also true. Rest is very important. Human connection, hobbies, mindfulness, which is very new age for some of us, but it does work, especially the tactical or box breathing, and writing things down, getting things off our chests and expressing them. That's not really terribly useful when you're down an engine and you now need to fly an approach to minimums. Writing things down is not what we need. We need some aviation tools to help. And Caroline's talked extensively about personal minima or personal minimums, and I'm going to talk a bit more about those as well. Thinking about potential problems when you're not acutely stressed. So planning, Sainki talked about that. Training is critical. We do have a bias as aviators to tend to spend money on gadgets, but the best investment in safety is the skill of the aviator. Training will give you the best bang for your buck out of anything you can possibly invest in aviation. Another technique which works really, really well once you get over feeling daft is to verbalize things. Say things out loud. When you're going through your checklists, verbalize it. Brief yourself. Have a pre-takeoff briefing, not just for yourself, but for the passengers so that they know what to expect. Your mind is very good at remembering something that you've just heard or thought about. It's called recency, which Caroline, I'm sure, will touch on in another briefing. But having thought about what you need to do just before you need to do it prepares you for the eventualities. If in your pre-takeoff briefing, you say that in the event that I lose the only engine, I am going to maintain flying speed by lowering the nose aggressively, it means that in the very unlikely event that the engine fails, you are very likely to remember to do that. It'll reduce the startle and give you the tool that you need to fight the stress of the moment. Remember, you're trying to do this with 30% of your IQ tied behind your back. It's not a particularly easy thing, and that's not something that we are able to simulate very well in training. Personal limitations. Caroline talked extensively about what they are, but when you are setting your own personal limitations, seek assistance from a mentor or your instructor or a designated flight examiner. Make sure that you never accept more risk than the legal limits, or if you're flying for a company, the company limits. However, train to those legal limits. So, for example, if you're instrument rated and you've set a personal minimum that you're not going to fly an ILS lower than a 500-foot minimum, you still need to train down to 200 foot, because the day may well come when the weather changed a little bit faster than you thought, and you need to be able to do it. Planning limits versus actual limits is also quite an important concept. So if you and your aircraft are comfortable landing in a 20-knot crosswind, consider setting a planning minimum that you're not going to fly if the wind is more than 15. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer. That way, if you are airborne and the wind does increase a little bit, you've got that buffer that you need. You may also need multiple sets of limits, different aircraft, different flight rules, day and night. You may want to have very conservative rules when you're flying with certain passengers. All of these things are possible. But it's important to keep your personal minimums as simple as possible, because the more complex these things are, the more variable it becomes, and you are very easily able to talk yourself into bending or breaking those. Local knowledge is valuable when you're setting up your personal minimums. There's been quite a lot of discussion about special VFR. Your home field is perhaps a very good place to utilize special VFR. If you know, for example, that Lanseria often has poor visibility in the zone, but you've got a flight to the GF and the GF is generally cleared when the zone is suffering from poor vis, that's a good thing. You can then use special VFR and get the utility. Personal minimums and limits are also things that you should be reviewing periodically. If you haven't been flying a lot, it's maybe time to lift those limits a little bit. If you've been doing a lot of training or you've had a lot more experience since the last time you reviewed it, you may be able to lower them. Be realistic. And most importantly, if you're going to do this, commit to follow those limits. Because there's no point in doing this and the tools doesn't work if you set a limit and then break it at every opportunity. Writing these things down and committing to them is a very, very good exercise. I'm not going to go into all of these in the interests of time. I am just going to say that fatigue is a killer. Fatigue and stress is the most lethal combination in aviation. Be very, very realistic about what you are able to do. Alcohol and medication. Military simulator studies have shown that hangovers are actually worse for performance than intoxication. So if you are sticking with the legal 8 hours, or even if a more conservative 12 hours, if you've had a heavy session, that's not going to be good enough. One of the best personal limits that I've seen is somebody who set a limit based on the number of mistakes they made, just little things. So for example, somebody who didn't call for taxi clearance before taxiing might record that as one small error. Observe yourself and your performance. And if you can see that you're making lots of small mistakes, consider canceling for the day. Night is generally harder than day for all sorts of reasons. Dark is not easy, and especially if it's early in the morning, your circadian rhythms are such that your body doesn't really want to perform. So bear that in mind. IF can be a lot safer than GA manages to achieve through the use of things like approach bands. General aviation, you can fly an approach if the weather is below minimums under certain circumstances. You can commence the approach. The airlines don't do it, and their safety record is significantly better. Consider why the airlines have got different rules. Maybe those are rules that you want to adopt yourself. Circling approaches also can be a killer in IF flying. You might want to consider limiting those to airfields that you are really familiar with. Just a word on crosswinds. Remember that the maximum demonstrated crosswind of an aircraft is not a limit, but perhaps it should be. Caroline and Sankey have talked at length about these. I'm not going to do that. I would suggest, however, that you approach these very conservatively. Always give yourself an out And remember that all of the performance figures in your pilot's operating handbook were achieved with a brand new aircraft with a test pilot at the controls. Now, you may be lucky enough to be flying a new aircraft and you may be a test pilot. Do you really want to stake your life and the lives of your passengers on being able to get exactly what the book says? Something to think about very carefully. My favorite slide. It's very important for all of us to remember. We've got lots of fancy kit, glass cockpits, GPS, very fancy aircraft. It requires the pilot's brain to maintain safety. If you find yourself tempted to exceed the limits that you've committed to, ask yourself why. You have an obligation to yourself, to your family, and to your passengers to operate safely. As the saying goes, aircraft limitations are only important if you plan to use the aircraft again. But your limits, you want to use yourself again. You want to be yourself in the future. Do not exceed your limits. Be conservative and give yourself a little bit of a buffer. Now, apologies to the ladies. This quote is from a very different era. And today, Harry would probably say, a person has to know their limitations. But it is vital that each of us know our limitations and respect them. Respect the limitations of the aircraft and respect the limitations of the system that we operate in. And again, there are Mayday's details. If you want to talk, please contact us. And hopefully this has been something that provokes a little bit of interest and has been somewhat valuable.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ari. I think it's always great to just see that perspective of things. Just as important as everything else. You know, like I said before, it all ties in together perfectly. Guys, that's the end of our presentations. We don't have any more presenters. We have got one or two questions that we can quickly run through, and then we will do the final thing. So Ari, while you hear this one's for you, and I think it's, you know, maybe an interesting or tricky question to answer. And the question comes from Connie and Muffy King. He says, when do you know you have stress? Is there, I mean, you spoke about, I think you kind of answered it by saying, you know, measure the little mistakes you make, etc., etc. But would you say there's a, you know, a real definitive way to, you know, self-realization that, you know, you are actually under stress so that you can notice it?
I think it's one of those things that's very difficult, just like hypoxia. It's insidious and it's going to differ from person to person. The best indicator that I've seen and personally has worked for me is when I stop taking joy in the things that I love. So if the company of my family doesn't make me feel good, if flying doesn't make me feel good, if something that I'm truly passionate about, and I know I've been passionate about, just doesn't do it and it's not quite good enough. Another danger sign is the fact that you are always perpetually tired. That is an excellent sign of chronic stress. If you sleep a lot and you don't feel rested, if you are waking up and worrying about things, that's an excellent sign that you are approaching not necessarily a breakdown, but burnout is in your future if you continue on that. And it's very straightforward to manage. But you've got to acknowledge it and you've got to take action. We've talked about managing how to manage in the previous webinars, so I'm not going to go there. But those, I think, are the best from a chronic point of view. Acute, you're making mistakes, you're fixated. And again, it's difficult for us to recognize this as pilots in the cockpit. You're busy, you're trying to do things, and by definition, when you stress, you've lost some of your mental bandwidth, and that's often what you're using to monitor your own performance. So spend some time with an instructor. If you can spend some time in a simulator, get them to put you under as much pressure as they possibly can and see what it feels like. Much the same way that going on one of those hyperbaric chambers to teach you about the effects of hypoxia. Everybody's symptoms are a bit different. Stress is much the same.
Okay, 100%. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Then we got another question that, Kobus, I don't know if you want to come on to answer it or you just want me to read it. The question was about special VFR, and it says, please confirm how many aircraft in a controlled airspace may be allowed to operate in special VFR at a time. Kobus, you want to answer that? You want me to just read your response?
Oh, you can just read. Thanks, Frans.
Okay, so guys, I mean, I'm sure most of you know Kobus Turin. He's also very active and very involved in this initiative, in this forum panel. He's also one of the very good speakers that we have from time to time. So very much part of keeping this all together. And question, Kobus answered, good questions, just spoken with Tambo ATC. It depends on the situation traffic-wise. So it could be denied if too busy, but there's no specific number, which, you know, it makes sense. Depends on what the airspace looks like, if there's a spot, if they think it's safe. Guys, that's I'm just going to double check that that's all the questions. That's all the questions, which for me is amazing. I mean, that shows that, you know, it was extremely informative and everyone got to explaining their points properly. Thanks again for joining us. This was amazing. Thanks also to Rob Jonkers, who's in the background, and Walter Dubell and Neil Piper. There's a lot of people behind the scenes that get involved in making this a success, and thank you very much. Neil, I think back to you if you guys want to maybe you know, close this off for us in the professional, proper manner. But from my side, good to go. I mean, I think this was fantastic. I think we all could learn something and has taken something away from it, as always. And as always, guys, thank you for being here. You know, we couldn't do these things if you didn't show up and join us. It wouldn't be possible. And just one last request before you jump off. I think your entry is just to get one friend to join you the next time. That way we can just reach more people, you know, get the message of safety out, which obviously makes aviation and flying safer for all of us. We're all sharing the same airspace, etc. But that's it from me. Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me present this. It's a massive honor and a privilege. That's it. Neil, thank you very much.
Frans, thank you so much. Really appreciate all your efforts and for keeping the flow and keeping it light, as I mentioned earlier. And then really, I think to the speakers, Ari, Sankey, Caroline, you guys were absolutely brilliant tonight. And, you know, it means a lot to us as a team. And I think to everybody listening, I know the amount of effort that you guys put in, and it's really appreciated. So thank you very much. And I really think if you think about it, it's the purpose of these webinars is to keep everybody safe by being better prepared, and also with some introspection. I think that's what's come out for me tonight. And just a reminder, if you haven't seen our previous webinars, just head to virtualaerosouthafrica.co.za, virtualaerosouthafrica.co.za, just to view the past webinars. There is some really good content out there. So once again, thanks for joining us, and have a blessed evening, everybody. Take care.